Hi, my name is Tom Coolidge, and I am Esri's Pipeline Industry Manager. I'm facilitating today's webinar, along with my colleague Jeff Allen, Esri's Global Pipeline Practice Lead. Welcome to our focus on realizing the benefits of mapping in the cloud. This webinar is part of the Petroleum and Pipeline webinar series. I think you'll find our time together today to be interesting, informative, and helpful. Please welcome my colleague, Jeff Allen.
Thanks, Tom. Thanks, everybody, for joining in this morning. I'm going to take you through the presentation about our cloud strategy and how that ties in with your overall location strategy for your GIS platform within your organization. But before we dive really into technical details around the cloud, I kind of wanted to back up a second and really talk about this location strategy and really understand what are the components that make up a location strategy for most of our organizations. So there's a couple different components that come into play when we talk about the location strategy. Obviously we have the infrastructure, and we'll talk more about that today. But with that, we have the actual GIS technology and the people behind that technology as well. So really all these are essential elements to success. And so before we jump into the infrastructure piece, I did want to touch a little bit today on some of the stuff that we're doing around business value and how it ties directly to the GIS technology. And this is something that I've been really kind of working on a lot this year, because it's very difficult as we expand the GIS platform. We have more and more components, more technology, more applications that we deploy. It becomes very difficult to take those concepts and bring them to the business and have the business understand what the value is. So one of the things that we've really been focusing on are these common use patterns. And so a lot of these patterns are ways that we allow you to sort of take our technology and hook it directly into the business value or the business need. And so when we look at any type of deployment of our GIS technology within the enterprise, we can often tie all the business case back to one of these common use patterns. So for example, if I was doing something with engaging the organization around a risk analysis, maybe that has a data management component or a use pattern to it. It probably has a mapping and visualization, and it probably has a constituent engagement and a decision support component. So again, this ties us, and if we can figure out what the common use pattern is for any particular business case, then we can tie it directly to the technology. Here's another example of that for a pipeline and supporting pipeline operations from an inspection point of view. If you haven't seen our use case study from BP, it's out on our website. It's definitely worth a watch. But in part of that video, they talk about pipeline inspections. And again, if I was to try to figure out what technology I needed for this, I could look at this particular video. I'd see mapping and visualization. I'd see analytics going on here. I'd see decision support pattern going on here, and then design and planning pattern. So again, taking those patterns and tying them back. Once I figured out the patterns, I'd know exactly which Esri technology to deploy to do any of these problems. So it's a significant part, and you'll hear a lot about our messaging around these patterns as we move forward as a way to communicate real business value of the GIS technology within your organizations. And if any of you are attending our upcoming Petroleum User Group meeting in Houston in a couple weeks, you'll hear more about this same concept as we demonstrate things on stage that first day of the conference. But now let me focus on what the topic of today's webinar. And so in your location strategy, part of the three rings of that main location strategy is the infrastructure and how we deploy it. The infrastructure deployment has been fairly straightforward for the last decade, but it's been emerging as this new cloud technology kind of comes onto the scene. So for most of us who have been using GIS technology over the years, obviously we've had that desktop environment where most of us all started our careers, and then we kind of moved that into the sort of enterprise space, right, where we had servers and we had connected desktops to those servers. And now we're seeing really what we call this sort of system of systems. We have multiple of these servers, some located within our organization, some located maybe outside our organization, and how all those systems are tied together in a distributed sense, right? So this is really where a lot of organizations are taking advantage of the cloud technology, the web technology, to sort of bring these systems together and tie everything together into a simple or a centralized concept or a single version of the truth of their assets for their enterprise. And so we look at that, we see a couple of different patterns emerging. The first of being the traditional on-premise pattern, where we have an enterprise server, our desktops, and all the Esri technology loaded on servers within our organization. Now, the second pattern that's evolving is either a self-managed or potentially an Esri-managed public cloud. We take some of that server technology, some of that hardware, some of that software, and move it into the cloud and then connect that back to our enterprise. Again, a lot of organizations that we work with are doing this themselves, whether using sort of Amazon or the Microsoft Azure platform. We also offer this as a services to our customers as well, where we actually manage that infrastructure and that hardware and software for you and serve that back to you. And then the third deployment pattern really kind of is software as a service, where you're not really managing the infrastructure anymore. You're just buying access to the software. It's already configured, it's already set up on the servers, and you're just deploying that as in sort of our named user environment. And we've seen a lot of uptick in this around a couple different areas, and I'll kind of explore those more as we go through the PowerPoint. But these are the three patterns when we talk about how to deploy our technology. And obviously, the second two are really more geared towards cloud or hybrid implementation. So as we start looking at how we deploy this technology in the cloud, we often think about sort of a lift and replace approach, where we're taking our entire GIS platform and maybe moving it into a hosted or a cloud environment. And that's great. A lot of companies have come to us because they have sort of this cloud first or cloud ready strategy that they're implementing. And there's huge IT initiatives around moving things into the cloud. But there's also strategic ways to move just pieces of the technology into the cloud and leverage it that way. So if you kind of see our sort of offering here, there's a lot of different pieces that make up that puzzle. And I want to step you through a couple of different ways that you might be able to take advantage of moving just a piece of the technology to the cloud and serving that back and integrating it with your on-premise solution. So the first way we've seen that been done pretty successfully is with the field mobility pieces, right? So usually when we start talking to customers about field mobility, whether that be through just the Explorer application or Workforce or Navigator, or actually collecting data in the field, let's say Survey 123 or Collector, there's two major sort of hurdles that most organizations need to get over. One is, how do we connect these devices back to our enterprise system through our corporate firewall? And how do we potentially leverage other people who might be using these devices that maybe not be part of our organization, maybe they're contractors, so they might not necessarily have logins or corporate logins to our system, right? Those are sort of two points that I always get asked about when people are starting to move to field mobility. So one of the strategies here is to take the field mobility piece and move just that portion of the solution up to the cloud. And basically what we're doing is we're taking the parts of the technology that are dealing and interfacing directly with these units and moving it closer to where those units are actually living in the field, right? And then once we take that information and consolidate it back to a central server that's sitting in the cloud, we then have just one connection point that we have to worry about. We can bring that data back into the corporate firewall from that external server. We're often doing that with sort of secure layer or maybe portal-to-portal collaboration to be able to connect these things together and bring them back in-house. Now, that's the other nice thing about the field apps is not only do they work against sort of an enterprise server sitting in the cloud, maybe on a hosted solution, but it also interfaces nicely with ArcGIS Online, right? So you can maybe deploy just a few of your key layers to ArcGIS Online, have your field workforce using that hosted solution in the cloud to interface with, and then bring that data back from ArcGIS Online back to the enterprise. The second piece that we've seen really successfully deployed into the cloud environment is our Imagery solution, right? So we think about all the different types of imagery that companies are capturing and managing. And this is really starting to explode as we see more and more use cases for drones, right? Companies are going out, they're flying facilities, they're doing inspections with drones. It's creating a massive amount of imagery that they're capturing. And oftentimes to manage that imagery, manage it historically, find storage space for it, and do all those things internally can be a challenge. But what you can do is take, say, our image server, move just the image server to the cloud and put that on a platform that's scalable to your environment. So highly available, scalable. As the needs of your organization grow, those servers automatically grow with it. And basically what you end up doing is serving this imagery back to yourself through the corporate firewall. So it's not actually storing any of your proprietary facility information in the cloud, just this imagery information, which you're probably already streaming from our Living Atlas anyways for some of our base maps. It's that very same concept. So you can bring it into web maps, you can bring it into mobile devices that are connected, and you can bring it back into your desktops and serve it up to the organization that way. The other sort of emerging pattern here is real-time analytics, right? So as we start to want to bring in real-time sensor information to the GIS, this might be SCADA information, this might be locations of workers, this might be vehicle tracking information. Basically, these real-time feeds of data that are coming in from the outside world into our GIS, oftentimes, again, very similar to that mobile concept, taking that server, moving it closer to where the sensors live, sort of in the cloud outside the firewall, capturing all the data, managing it there, and then taking that data through the geo event server and pushing it back into the organization to utilize it and consume it, whether it be in web maps or apps or in the desktop, is also a way to easily integrate a lot of these real-time sensor data back into your GIS. So we're seeing a lot of sort of new and emerging patterns using this sort of sensor information to bring it back into the corporate environment. Now, once we have this information, like the real-time analytics or imagery, oftentimes we're collecting just huge amounts of data. So along with that sensor information, their geo event server, we also see companies also deploying the big data stores as well, right? So how do we store this information over time? Might be weather data, might be real-time traffic data, might be locations of workers. Again, you're building up a huge repository of this information, so storing that in an enterprise geodatabase might not be the first and best solution. Putting it in a big data store and analyzing it over time is a way to do that. And again, you could sit one of these big data stores right next to some of these servers that are in the cloud and manage that data that way. And once you have the big data store, doing things like machine learning, we have a use case for customers are taking all their real-time tracking data for their vehicles and building on the fly their custom roads from those maps by using some machine learning scripts. And again, this is a way to leverage multiple CPUs, multiple horsepower that the cloud offers, be able to do some of that information in a scalable environment when needed, and then bring the results of this machine learning back into the organization from the cloud environment. So again, another way to leverage the cloud and a slice of the solution as we move forward. So let me dig a little bit now into the kind of different details of the technology underneath that drives a number of those Esri solutions. So obviously we have the ArcGIS environment, and we have a number of different ways that we can actually deploy that into the cloud. And so I'm going to go through some of these different ways and explain what some of these mean and give them some definition, and then show how they tie back to our technology. So the first one you was mostly heard of is SaaS, which is called software as a service, which basically means you're delivering the full solution, including the software, on sort of a web-based service for a monthly fee. So I just need a login, everything's set up for me, everything's registered, everything's connected together in the back end. I'm just really using this and consuming this as a piece of software. Probably the easiest way I can explain this to you from something you probably do every day is, if I'm on my iPhone and I sign up for a piece of software, I'm paying potentially a monthly fee to use that software, but everything is being handled sort of in the back end for me, and I'm just getting a login to access it. Now, some of our power users are going to most likely be more interested in desktop as a service, right? So this is where we're serving up a sort of a virtual desktop to folks that have things like ArcGIS Pro and ArcMap and things that we use as desktop tools and extensions we use on a daily basis. So this is actually how I've been running all our Esri demos for the pipeline industry for about 2 years now. Pro and servers and all my demos are actually sitting up on an Amazon EC2 instance and along with my desktop. And so I have a Mac, and literally wherever I am in the world, as long as I have some type of internet connection, I can log in and use my desktop tools against my enterprise environment. So this is, desktop as a service is how we're deploying those types of tools back to your organization. Then we have infrastructure as a service, and infrastructure is really where you're sort of going and purchasing the hardware, not necessarily the software layer, but all the hardware, the networking, the data storage that goes behind this. This is most likely tied to sort of the Amazon, the Microsoft Azure type of pattern, where you're kind of in charge of how that software is deployed and managed, but somebody else is sort of running the hardware infrastructure for you, sort of outsourcing your IT, if you want to think of it that way from a hardware standpoint. Then we have managed services, where it kind of expands on the infrastructure of the service, but in this case, and this is where Esri comes into play as well, we manage the software layer for you as well. So I want the full, I want ArcGIS Online. I need the full power of server, but I don't necessarily need to manage all that in-house. I can contract with Esri. Esri provides the infrastructure. They also provide the software, the management, make sure it's updated, make sure it's all configured correctly, and really provide that back to you as a cloud environment and more of a turnkey solution. And the third pattern is kind of tied to infrastructure as a service, where you're managing that software and the data on your own infrastructure as well. So this might be kind of outside your DMZ, a little closer to the cloud, but not necessarily behind the firewall or on your corporate premise. So if you kind of look at all the different components that make up a solution and how they are kind of laid out against each of these different patterns, you can see how it sort of what we manage and what you manage and what potential third party would manage. So when you manage it, right, you're really responsible for the networking, the storage, the server, the whole 9 yards, the application, the data. It's really under your control. You're doing all the heavy lifting to lift up these solutions. When you move into that infrastructure as a service, you're still responsible for the applications, the data storage, and the operating systems, but what they're managing, the cloud provider, is really the virtualization layer, the servers themselves, the storage, and the networking behind all that. When you move into, say, an Esri managed services, what you're still managing is the data and the data layer and how that data is set up, but we're actually taking over the operating system layer and the applications themselves. And we're using SaaS or DaaS, really everything, we're managing everything. You're just logging in and using that software to do your daily job. So everything's kind of managed from our standpoint. So the real world tie-in to this is, the way I kind of keep it straight in my head is, if I think of it like a vehicle. So, if I buy a car, that's customer managed. I own the car, I have to put gas in it, I have to drive it everywhere. I'm fully responsible for that car. So the last is sort of like when I lease a car, right? I'm still responsible for maintenance, I'm still responsible for putting gas in it and driving it around, but somebody else actually owns the hardware itself, actually owns the vehicle, right? And 3 years, I can trade it in and get an updated car if I want to. And then the third one is sort of like renting a car, so under Esri Managed Services. I'm still driving myself, I'm still putting gas in it, but the maintenance and the hardware and everything else is provided to me by the rental company. And then the last sort of SaaS DaaS pattern, think of it as Uber, right? I just need to go from point A to point B, and I don't want to really be responsible for anything along the way. I need somebody to drive me, put gas in the car, make sure the vehicle's working properly, and gets me where I need to go. So when I try to think of how these lay out, I often use that analogy, and it kind of brings me back to kind of what level I want to participate in this cloud environment, and it kind of points me to the solution that I'm looking for. So within that ArcGIS platform, we kind of start talking about the infrastructure in this wheel concept, right? And this kind of breaks out those different slices of the solution. So most of us for years have started with that central repository, right? It's the central database that contains all our assets. And from there, we start working around kind of this wheel of functionality. And most of the folks that we work with sort of, as they deploy our technology, sort of work around this wheel as well. So the first one is, we have that data, and how do we now move it out to the rest of the organization, right? So this is what we've been referring to as that system of engagement, or the mapping portal. So today, if you wanted to do a system of engagement, you can actually do it it's available in all three services, or all three patterns. The system of engagement could be completely done through ArcGIS Online. That's the SaaS approach. It could be done through Esri Managed Services. So we could set up the portal, and we could set up the infrastructure for you and serve that information back to you. You could also set up a system of engagement using the infrastructure as a service pattern. So you could take your server license, your portal license, move it up to the Amazon cloud, set up your portal deployment there, and then have all your users access that information back within your organization from that layer. So that's what's available today from a system of engagement point of view. On the workforce, again, all three patterns are available. So we see a lot of people using ArcGIS Online for their mobile, as well as managed services and infrastructure as a service. We also see folks taking servers and moving it just past their firewall. So putting it in their DMZ and then hooking that server back into their organization as well. So a lot of ways to easily deploy the mobile workforce solution using the cloud, and collaborate that information, collect it. Maybe you only push a segment of your data up into the cloud that's used day to day on the workforce solution, and then have a technology to synchronize that data collected on the mobile workforce, push it back into the central repository, and then act on that data from the rest of the organization. So real time, this is where we start getting into the planning aspects. Right now, if you wanted to do real time, certainly you could take the geo event server, you could deploy it in the last solution. So you could take that geo event server license and move it up to the cloud and host that information back to yourself. We also have the geo event server in our Esri Managed Services stack. So if you wanted to turn on an event server and wanted Esri to host that for you, we have the infrastructure for that, the hardware, the software. You just pay a monthly fee for that and then tie that back to your organization. We are working on plans to move the geo event server and make it part of this ArcGIS Online subscription service. So plans or development is underway on that, and you should be hearing more about that as we move into the later this year, because we have some plans for starting to release some of that technology in the 2019-2020 timeframe. So the big data store and the analytical server, right now, most of that is planned for this year, later this year. So managed services, I think this got pushed off to just early 2018. So we're just now supporting the big data store, data analytics on managed services. That's available starting now. Right now, the infrastructure as a service, we don't have anything planned for those. And we're also looking at the big data analytics for the SaaS environment later on in 2019-2020. So the industry-specific applications, so for the pipeline industry, this would be ArcGIS pipeline referencing tools. So again, this is available through Esri Managed Services. So we have a lot of companies that are taking advantage of this in a pilot scenario, right? So because the ArcGIS pipeline referencing requires sort of 10.5, 10.5.1, or 10.6, a lot of companies are trying to figure out how to create that environment internally to host pilot projects and proof of concept. So one of the things that you might consider is Esri Managed Services for that. So we could set up a demo environment for you or a staging environment for you in managed services on the newer infrastructure, not really have to interrupt any of the operations behind the firewall. Infrastructure as a service. So obviously you could take that same concept to Amazon or the Microsoft Azure, set up a server in the cloud there and install ArcGIS pipeline referencing on those servers and either use it in production or for proof of concepts. Now, because ArcGIS pipeline referencing has a server extension, you could also take some of that information and serve it back to ArcGIS Online, right? ArcGIS pipeline referencing actually creates proper feature classes in the geodatabase, so that information can then be shared through the firewall and back to ArcGIS Online and out to the system of engagement. So on the imagery side, obviously the Imagery's image server, you could set that up both on the infrastructure as a service or managed service. Those are both available today, and we see customers taking advantage of them. Right now, we don't have any plans for image server as a SaaS. We would most likely, because of the storage requirements or the varying storage requirements between organizations, this will most likely stay in the SaaS or in the IaaS and managed services realm for the time being. The actual desktop itself, so beyond the Esri managed services, which we can do now, we'll probably be sometime this year be announcing a very dedicated desktop as a service environment where you can just have a subscription to ArcGIS on ArcGIS Pro and access Pro directly from the cloud software that way. And obviously, if you wanted to set up that in a desktop environment as a last solution, you could, that's available today, and that's how I run my system on a daily basis in that last environment. And then the last part is obviously there's quite a few tools that developers take care of. So we see a lot of organizations setting up development servers in the cloud. Obviously, as we try to do new development work, oftentimes it's difficult to maintain a bunch of internal servers. It's spinning up new hardware just for a proof of concept or development project can get costly when we start talking about dedicated hardware for each of these solutions. So we see a lot of organizations taking advantage of the cloud to host their development environments. So you can easily spin up a new server in the cloud, put the latest and greatest Esri technology in that server and start your development efforts without really having to impact your internal organization or your internal architecture or deployment pattern to get these new systems up and running. So, as we start looking at the cloud and the overall patterns, think about these in a couple of different terms, right? There's like sort of a matrix approach here. Are you looking to move your entire organization to the cloud? Is this an IT-led strategy of moving the enterprise to the cloud, which means all these components? In that case, you want to look at how these all things work together. Or are you looking to potentially just use a piece of this? Or are you maybe struggling with a piece of the solution because of the difficulties with where the data resides and moving the data back out to the field workforce or real-time analytics? Those are pieces of the puzzle you want to consider. And then once you figured out what those pieces are, then how do you want to deploy them? And looking at the matrix that way, is it a managed services approach? Is it an infrastructure approach? Is it a SaaS approach? And kind of using this slide to kind of guide you through what's available and when future releases might be available to support what you're trying to do. So here's how a number of organizations that has successfully moved to the cloud. This is sort of the pattern that they've used to go through those steps. And there's pretty much 4 big major steps in the process. So obviously the preparation step, preparing for the cloud, looking at your cloud readiness, having a good understanding of your existing and to-be architecture, and how your solution is currently deployed. So when we start thinking about preparing for the cloud, a lot of this goes into the planning work and sort of mapping out which components can go where. And really the devil here is in the details of how things are connected together. We can easily spin you up a solution in the cloud tomorrow, but tying that back into your corporate infrastructure and how every organization does IT slightly differently, that's where all this planning work. Then we get into the onboarding. A lot of organizations are pretty heavy into the security assessment stage. So we do quite a bit of work with organizations moving to the cloud to show them how our security layer works, how it compares with a number of different industry standards, completing a different questionnaires for different organizations on how the security should be set up, validating those plans, right? Doing proof of concepts and starting the development setup. Once we've got the solution deployed in the cloud, there's some ongoing steps as well, right? So you've seen probably our new software called the ArcGIS Monitor, System Monitor, right? We deploy those with both on-premise and cloud solutions, scanning those servers, making sure they're up to date, patches are up to date, security layers are up to date, the ongoing operations of that, and really deciding what organization or who wants to sort of do that work. Are you outsourcing that work to the cloud provider? Is that something your IT organization is taking on? And really kind of pinning down who does those ongoing operations for you. And then really looking at the changes to the system as we go forward too, right? So once we have the solution deployed in the cloud, how are we going to do software versioning? How are we going to do updates for new capabilities? Is the cloud going to offer the same dev, QA, staging, tests, and production environments? Or are we going to do some of that behind the firewall and then push production just to the cloud? So really looking at the change management piece of the moving to the cloud is often one of the fourth step to looking at this moving to the cloud strategy as we go forward. So thank you for joining us this morning. Hopefully I gave you some things to think about relative to your cloud strategy and how we move forward and how Esri can help you. Certainly everybody here at Esri has a vested interest in making you successful with our technology. We have a lot of experts within our organization that have done this. Certainly if you look at our ArcGIS Online environment, we definitely have millions and millions of hits, millions of maps being made every day on that environment, and have to scale it and keep it up 24/7 and all those things. So we've got a lot of experience around sort of how to build these scalable systems, and hopefully we can help you with your successful cloud rollout as well. Thanks everybody. Tom?
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. We didn't receive any general questions for answering during our time together. If you ask a technical question, please look forward to hearing from us in the next few days. Thanks again for joining in today. We appreciate your participation. This concludes our webinar. Have a great day.